Good morning, everyone. My name is Beck. I'm head of consulting for Impellam. I don't run it, as Alan kindly thought I did. I'm just a cog in the wheel. Wow, that's what 300 people looking at you feels like. It's quite interesting. I was getting ready this morning and time and tie in front of a mirror, practicing what I was going to say and open and how I was going to introduce myself, etc. And I realised my little 3-year-old had materialised next to me. And she sits there and listens to me muttering to myself and talking through things for a couple of minutes. And then she promptly stands up, looks at me and goes, "Daddy, you don't know what you're talking about." And walks off. So it's with my confidence absolutely brimming that I stand in front of you today. Yeah. Anyway, in preparing for today, I'm very conscious that a lot of my fellow presenters who, some have been before me, a lot coming afterwards, we'll be discussing, recruitment trends, attraction, selection, social media, different generational aspects and so forth. And really ultimately focusing on the front end of the process, sourcing and selecting, finding the right candidates for the job. And frankly, not being able to compete with those, I wanted to do something different. In the interest of provoking a debate, I really wanted to take a look at the bigger picture and pose a bigger question. And rather than focusing on the start of the process and how you get people, I want to consider why they leave. Collectively in this room, we will spend a fortune on attracting and selecting people this year. The earlier stat that we think we're going to hire more people this year, even though apparently it's going to be easier to direct source them. But we will spend a fortune on that, and we have increasing amounts of data on the channels and methods that work, and those that don't. However, we know from the work that we do with our customers that the costs of attraction and selection are dwarfed by the costs of attrition. In one case, for one customer we did some work with and we audited, we discovered that the costs of attrition were 13 times larger than the costs of direct recruitment, as measured by that company. And that company only measured their direct costs, ATS, attraction, selection, team, agencies. They had no concept of what the cost of attrition was. And to date, we've not really had the same quality or depth of data regarding attrition or its root causes. Yes, we undertake exit interviews, but these are always, or at least generally, in the context of people leaving your business and not really wanting to burn bridges. And we always say that employees leave a manager and not a job, but we don't know if it's true, and we can't quantify it. And we could never quantify what the impact of a poor manager versus a good manager actually is. But recent work in data analytics and workforce science, big data, have enabled questions like this to be answered. So today, I will show you how true it is, and I will quantify it. In creating today's presentation, I've used a collection of sources, disparate channels, and distilled them into an analysis, which you'll see. These are all of them. I wanted to share them all now because it means I don't have to keep referring to them as I go through the presentation, so I thought it might streamline it. So they'll be there, they're in the slides when they come out to you. And of course, I've used Impellam data throughout, which poses a reasonably obvious question as to who are Impellam. And quite simply, Impellam's probably the largest recruitment company you've never heard of. I was speaking to a couple of people before we came in and how they, with their brands and their businesses, have a similar problem. We're a global business, but we operate through a multi-brand structure. And you can see along the bottom some of the brands that we're better known as and that we work with. We have brands that focus on technology, finance, catering, logistics, engineering, or who focus on outsourced solutions, such as managed service programs or recruitment process outsourcing. And from a quick recap of the audience in the room, from the details we got from the job post, about 35% of you are customers of our group through one of these brands. We employ 2,500 recruiters globally, turnover 1.2 billion, and we manage a further 1.6 billion on behalf of our customers. Fifth largest recruitment company in the UK with 10,000 customers and putting 75,000 people a week into work. So as a collective, we have quite a unique view into recruitment, into each different vertical, talent pools, the end customers and the talent strategies. And I'm fortunate enough to work across and engage with those brands and the customers on all aspects of recruitment and talent. So, big data. And I saw a Twitter feed earlier during Todd's conversation about no comment on big data. So here's a slide on big data for you. The universal font of all knowledge, Wikipedia, defines big data like this, which I would rather suggest is unhelpful. You could argue quite a bit on Wikipedia, actually. And we're all used to looking at data, at management information, in order to glean insight. But typically, the information we look at is reviewed from a single source. We look at an applicant tracking system, a series of test profile results, 360-degree reviews, even the weather or whatever. But big data is about taking disparate sources, multiple channels of varied data, and reviewing them together to try and eke out meaning. So it's about the volume of data that you're looking at, hence big. And it's about the variety of it and how much it changes in terms of its velocity. So really, there's two things we know about big data. It's big and it's about data. And data analytics is about analysing all of this to see which elements predict or correlate with future outcomes. It doesn't say why, but it does say what. And possibly the most famous example of this is Macroeconomics. In their books and their podcasts, the authors interview people and scour data sets to identify patterns that are counterintuitive to what you'd classically think and consider. They've analysed drug gangs and the economies of drugs, why estate agents will sell their house for more money than they'll sell yours for, the fall in crime rates and the effect of policing, Roe versus Wade, and so forth. And perhaps one of the most famous examples, or infamous really maybe, is about gun deaths. We all know that gun crime in America is unfortunately quite prevalent. There are 11,000 gun homicides in America every year. What is slightly less well known is that there are 20,000, almost double, gun suicides in America each year. You hear about one and not the other. So which is more deadly, a gun or a swimming pool? If my US-based daughter has a choice between two playdates, one family owns a gun and one family owns a swimming pool, which do I accept and which do I cancel? And the answer actually isn't even close. In the US, one child under 10 drowns for every 11,000 swimming pools. But one child under 10 is shot for every 1,000,000 guns. My child is 100 times more likely to die in a swimming pool than in a gun-related accident. As a more pertinent industry-related example, retailers have been using big data for years. They model their store layouts, the shelves, the location of them, the height, the width, and so forth. They correlate that data with local demographics, with the weather, with events, the Olympics, World Cup, or whatever, with previous spending histories. And they consolidate all of this together with special offers from suppliers and availability of certain products. And then they work out what will sell, where it should be placed in the store, how many wide you should have the crunchy nut cornflakes, and how deep it should be. They put that into the procurement and the supply chain so the trucks leave the warehouse and get to the store. They know how long it would take to get to the store for the trucks, so they have people waiting to unload it. And because they know the layout of the store, they know that the trolleys that are furthest away in terms of distance to get to the shelf, they put on last. So they come off first, so there's not congestion in the trolleys as they're moved around the store and annoy customers. And they've been doing that for 6 years. And it's this kind of sophistication and this kind of analytics that's really starting to hit HR. Of all enterprise data, of all the data in companies, HR is estimated to comprise a third. Yet the analysis that we place on this, in terms of planning, attraction, selection, management, development of individuals, is actually quite sorely limited. And that time is really starting to change. Imagine being able to analyse your internal data, job descriptions, applicant data, CVs, test results, personality profiles, performance reviews, merging this with external data in terms of demographies, skill sets, the economy, and so forth, and actually starting to be able to predict who should be your next CEO, CFO, what training courses they need to go on, where all your succession planning is. So let's look at that in terms of attrition. Recent research analysed performance records of 121 million workers across 18 industries and 13 countries. It focused on hourly workers, which in their definition covers 60% of the working population, which is 1.3 billion workers globally, or in the UK context, 18 million workers. An average of 50% of these workers have less than 12 months tenure in the business. And so the estimated cost of this, replacement, productivity losses, training, is hundreds of billions of pounds annually. And by analysing the worker characteristics of the applicants and their assessments, workforce data from hiring companies, the job types, the roles, publicly available data on the economy, and so forth, they can identify the top influences on attrition and their relative impact. And this is what they found. These are the statistically valid 5 top reasons that cause attrition and their relative impact on that cause of attrition. Don't need to write it down, we're going to take it all in order. So, taking them in order, first is macroeconomics. And this is the one factor you can do nothing about. It's the economy outside. In every recession, the number of people quitting their jobs declines. And then, as the economy recovers, attrition increases. That's not rocket science. But with some exceptions, the global economy is recovering. In the developed world, stock markets are close or almost at an all-time high. The UK is predicted to be the largest growing Western economy this year. Unemployment is falling. There's talk of interest rates rising, and so forth. So we're moving out of recession. In the US, people are quitting their jobs at the fastest rate for 5 years. This will continue. And the impact will be profound. Attrition will grow by 25% this year. But what's true across the pond is true here to a greater extent. The demand for staff in the UK is at a 15-year high today. And that is at a time when more people than ever before are in work in the UK. So we have more people in work and more jobs. Be interesting. So we've not had to deal with significant attrition or even a significant upswing in vacancies for years. So if you take one thing away from today, I would suggest that the knowledge of this external factor, and you can't do anything to do this, this will take place regardless of almost what we do. You can't control this. Your attrition will increase. Let me put this into a slightly different context for you. In the US, for every 100,000 students entering 9th grade, and that's the equivalent of GCSEs, sorry, I was almost going to say O-levels, which actually shows my age, 68,000 will graduate. Then of that 68,000, 40,000 will go into college, 17,000 will get a degree in 2021. Of those 17,000 in the US, 800 will be engineers, 125 will be mechanical engineers. 15 will be women, and 5 will remain in the profession for 5 years. So of every 100,000 school children entering equivalent of GCSE, there will be 5 female mechanical engineers with 5 years' experience. So I'll leave you 3 figures. 4.3 million entered 9th grade last year. That means in 2025, there will be 215 female mechanical engineers entering the profession with 5 years' experience. Yesterday, and I appreciate there might be duplication in the data, but on Career Builder US job site, there were 11,157 mechanical engineering jobs advertised. 215 with 5 years' experience who are female, 11,000 jobs. If you have staff challenges today, they will get worse tomorrow. Scarce skills will get harder to find. We know there are 3 things that sell a house. Location, location, location. Let's face it, there's enough programs on Channel 4 to tell us that. The same is true of jobs. And the distance employees live directly affects their tenure. Employees who live within 5 miles of work have the longest median tenure, remaining at their jobs 20% longer than employees with the shortest tenure. And we actually know this is true. We know that actually for hourly workers, some of the key questions we have to ask during the interview process is, where do you live in relation to work, and how are you going to get there? However, the data shows that walk score is more important. Now, walk score measures the walkability of a location, the amenities in that location, and what you, in effect, what can you do in your lunch hour to run your life rather than having to do it at the weekend in your own time. And when it comes to retention, even middling locations outperform the worst scoring locations. The middling locations have 58% longer retention. And again, we partially know this is true. We know that when call centres were outsourced to greenfield sites, unless they synchronised their buses and the mode of transport to get people there, it caused attrition. They either turned up 20 minutes early or 10 minutes late. But most interestingly, walk score correlates with all levers, whether voluntary, people quitting, or involuntary, you firing them. And this is one of those, we don't know why, but we know what aspects. And the thought is that employees who do errands in these locations with poor walk score struggle to get back to work, struggle to run their lives, invariably turn up a little bit late, and thus quit or are let go. So employees value locations and what they can do. So let's move on to company practices. Job applicants know the system. The problem is that all too often the needs of what we're looking for are too transparent. With the prevalence of the internet, it only takes a little ability to research and understand what interviews are like. Ask the recruiter, what kind of interview would it be? Competency-based interview? I'll go and research it. And actually, take a typical competency-based interview. If I'm asked to give an example of great customer experience, it isn't beyond the wit of most people to work out what the answer needs to be. It was bad. I turned up. I did something. I learned a lot from doing it. Repeat. I appreciate the slightly flippant, but actually you can learn this. And with the prevalence of some technology platforms, and there'll be a peer talking about Glassdoor later, there are applications where candidates upload the questions they were asked. There was a case where one of the major retailers in the UK was using some psychometric testing, but they kept using the same questions for every graduate. It took 3 days before all the answers were on the web. Pretty high scores after that point. And as an example of this, there was a cohort of workers. Do you follow rules, yes or no? Oh, I know the answer to this one. Yes. 67% of self-proclaimed rule followers are more likely to be terminated for following rules. If you make it too transparent, it's obvious what people want. So I would question, when you're selecting candidates, are you asking and collecting information on candidates that really informs you about their suitability for a job? So we know CVs may exaggerate. But do companies and recruiters? Todd said earlier, job descriptions, etc. And in an earlier presentation I've given at one of these events, I commented that job descriptions are almost universally positive. Everywhere's going to develop me. It's going to give me a competitive salary, the great benefits, the culture's marvellous, the training and the development, etc. Where's the reality? Is that reality? It might be a great place to work, but you're going to have to stay till 8 o'clock at night a couple of days a week to get the job done. So is that reality or aspiration what we portray? Almost universally, it is felt by candidates that recruiters overpromise. Following the previous example on interviews, are we helping candidates or leading them when we coach them for an interview? Do the recruiters tell the candidates what questions to expect? And this leads to a misalignment of expectations, uncertainty, resentment, and ultimately attrition. There is a simple cure for this, and that's honesty. And again, actually, we know this because in supplying workers to an assembly plant, we can actually measure and predict the future rate of attrition based on the difficulty of how we set up the job shadowing assessment event day. And we know from our analysis of the process that we run that the more aligned, the more realistic that event, or actually making that event slightly harder than reality of the job, that it will stop downstream attrition. So to workforce relationships. It is true the most important relationship at work is between the employee and their manager. It's the single biggest factor relating to attrition. Employees with the best managers are 6 times more likely to remain on the job than employees of managers who are the worst at performing, retaining staff. Just consider that for a moment. If you consider the cost of attrition in terms of rehiring, training, lost productivity, and so forth, imagine if you invested in those poorer managers and actually brought them up from lower quartile to maybe average. The saving that that would generate inside a business. So, if managers have such an impact 6 times, what causes a manager to be so good? And the research shows 2 things. One is obvious and one is less so. This is the obvious one. The more you pay them, the better they perform. Probably could have guessed that one. But what it also shows is that tenure is not statistically valid, doesn't lead to increased performance. So again, why is not clear, but the data infers that newer managers hired externally, A, are often paid more, but also seem to work and perform better than managers who've worked up through the ranks. And finally, to worker characteristics. Research shows that a candidate's previous related job experience has no bearing on their future performance or tenure. It's attitude, behaviours and motivations that do. There is a whole presentation in those 2 comments. So kind of parking that and moving off that. But overall, employees who are more technically savvy have higher performance and higher tenure. Again, that might not be overly surprising given how much technology we have to use in work, how we have to get to grips with things, etc. But almost how do you measure technological proficiency? Well, some measure it by typing speeds. Some ask direct questions. But as I've said before, I'd avoid the transparent ones. Can you use Word? Yes. Rather, what does Control A, Control C, Control V do? To actually test their knowledge of using the product. Select all, copy and paste. And technological adoption is also a key detriment of performance. A statistically valid, and I completely accept bizarre, way of measuring this is to identify what browser people used. Now, a US web-based travel firm was rather heavily fined for charging Mac users more for the same product as a PC user. They believed Mac users have a higher demographic, more disposable income, so they were actually using disparate pricing, charging more for a Mac than a PC user. And I am absolutely not suggesting that you based your attraction or your selection policy on whether people apply using Firefox or Chrome versus IE or Safari. But what it seems to show is that a way of showing how you can use technology is if you use something that's embedded in the system, that's one thing, but if you've been able to download and therefore use, you're more technically savvy. And so, really in summary, these are the factors that affect attrition and cause attrition. And attrition will increase this year. The economy is improving. To stop attrition, do you know what you're looking for in the first place? Do you know what good looks like? Do you actively hire against that knowledge? Employees do not leave their jobs, they leave managers. So invest in the poorest managers and their performance and their people management skills. And completely tongue-in-cheek, pay them more, replace them, or replace them for people who use Firefox and Chrome. But actually, almost at a kind of a bigger picture, how do you bonus recruiters? Do you make bonus recruiters for making a hire, making a great hire, or for making a great hire who stays with you? So thank you very much for your time, for listening. I hope you found it interesting. If you'd like to get in touch with any of those, the details on the screen, and I'm here this afternoon at the masterclass on RPO and MSPs. So thank you very much.